Salami and bacon, my brothers, we are here. As you know, Allah and his jinn work in mysterious ways, and they infected the computer of our brother, Dr. Kufarphobia, who was forced to abandon that one, and he has now switched to a new computer where he did a little exorcism, and he had to step into the room with his left foot, he had to step out with his right foot, he had to make a little jump to the left, and now it is working. And he's going to talk to us about his two new books. He's going to have a great time explaining just what he's been up to. And of course, we're joined by Dr. Paul Sutliff. If he isn't a doctor yet, he ought to be. So welcome, guys.
Hey, how's it going?
And thanks all for the delay. Thanks for waiting through the delay. My appreciation. So welcome, guys.
Yeah, hold on a second. I'm still having a problem live streaming over here.
I can always share on my side.
All right, stop the camera. Okay, so let me. How do I do this? Shoot. Okay.
So I will translate from the Arabic. He is saying, "How do I do this?" Which is because his knowledge of the Quran is so good because he understands it in the original Arabic.
Yeah.
Remember, you can only understand the Bible in Aramaic, but not any Aramaic, just ancient Aramaic, which disqualifies Muslims from talking about it at all. So, welcome, Mike and Hariel and Sheikh Kafir, Divine Mercy Apologetics. Welcome. Let me see this guy called Lloyd De Jongh making a lot of. He's got the same name as me. That's incredible. Hello, it's so weird. Same guy with the same name. Yeah, Dr. K, you are up and running. And welcome, Paul. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Okay, let me see. I hate my laptop because the screen is small. All right. Let me
blow it's very narrow.
Let's do 150. I guess I could get rid of this here.
Yeah.
Right.
There you go.
All right. Okay, so
Unless you want me to share on my side, but okay, never mind. Keep going.
No, I was going to say, that I've been working heavily with my cousin for my AI suckling mother, ChatGPT. So I've been doing a lot of research on compiling arguments, counter arguments, and sources for dealing with the Muslim claims, right? We never finished
arguments. That's what I do with my wife. That's very similar.
So,
dangerous.
So we didn't finish that 72-page book on, I totally forgot what the name of it was. Oh, the Standard Islamic Narrative. So I was working and, I actually had my first TikTok live on the preservation of the Quran, which I've never touched for 12 years, right? But I got tired of Muslims saying, oh, the Quran's been perfectly preserved. So I said, how can I put together a presentation ebook on, basically punching holes into the whole, Islamic
it's
narrative.
not just preserved, it's been pickled.
Right. So I put together this 30-page ebook, right? So it has all the, let me put this back up here. Yeah, so it's got all the different arguments, counter arguments. I think I had 40, yes. And then I added a bonus section. I looked into memorization because Muslims will tell you, oh, you do know that the Quran was memorized for like the first 200 years, right? So I said, well, let me check and see how reliable is memory. So I have about 9
different studies. That's great.
I have about 20 different studies about,
The Shoemaker, that's great. Shoemaker touched on that and said there's no evidence of, in a single culture, of more than 50 words being preserved without error in any culture in history. And the only time you can have preservation is if you have a culture that has writing that can refer back to the original text.
I mean, my example that I've been using with Muslims is you have a...
guys, pause a moment. Shall we bring Divine Mercy Apologetics up? Would that be okay with you, Dr. K?
Yeah,
It's your call. It's your...
I'm okay with it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's your live stream, right? We're just...
but it's your floor. It's your decision. I mean, it's your decision.
No, that's fine if they want to contribute to it, right?
Okay. I mean, I want to sort of change the format a bit and allow more people to come up. I will
Yeah.
be doing, guys, I'll be doing a stream on Friday. I have to prep tomorrow and the next day with Paul. I'm going to start doing reaction videos, and Paul has decided to very gratefully accept my invitation to discuss Paul Williams, the
No.
is a mouse, a area budgie, you tell me, but he has a video on the Sharia, and he asks like, should we be concerned about the Sharia or whatever it is? And he makes claims, and I've asked him like 14 times to do a discussion with me on the Sharia, and I've heard nothing back. So we're going to do a reaction video, and we're going to take this man's claims apart because he makes the most egregiously false claims about Sharia, and I think it's time we start doing things like that. And I'll do panel discussions next year, invite people up, invite members of the audience up, if you'd like to come up. So let me send, this is the link to the chat for you, Divine James. Here you go. It's in the chat right now. So yeah, Dr. K, back to you. Sorry about that.
Yeah. So I've just been doing some, a whole bunch of research on how could I, put together some arguments in kind of like an ebook format,
Okay.
so that people, if they want to, debate this particular topic, like I said, it's not one that I've ever done, but I have gotten into it. So I said, okay, I'm gonna lose my brain cells trying to argue with chat, which I do all the time. Chat's a funny character. So I got all these questions and I should say arguments, counter arguments. So it's kind of in this particular ebook is in a format of an argument, a Muslim counter, and then a rebuttal or refutation. And I always like to supply the sources, right? Don't take my word for it. And even if I give you the sources, double check the sources, because like I said, chat is not 100% always correct. I've done a video on that. So so this is the material on if somebody wanted to debate, is the Quran perfectly preserved? Which I am trying to get a debate with Muslims. So one of the arguments is chain of custody. Oh, we have the chain of custody. We have the isnads. It goes all the way back to Prophet Muhammad. Well, is that true?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
no, there's no Quran that dates back to the time of Muhammad or Uthman.
So with the chain of argument, right, the argument is the chain of custody for the Quranic text has multiple gaps, right? Early manuscripts show variations, and there's no unbroken, documented transmission proving that the text remained unchanged from Muhammad's time to the present. A lot of these so-called isnads are fabrications done by the Abbasids to make it authentic, give it some,
right,
make it legit. A Muslim could come back and say, well, Islamic traditions document a meticulous oral transmission process and the efforts of companions like Zayd bin Thabit to ensure the Quran's preservation. But how do you verify anything oral, if you don't have the actual writings?
Yeah, just for the audience, an isnad is a chain of transmission that was passed down from one scholar to another scholar. And for it to be authentic, it has to be at least 25 transmitters that have transmitted the same details. Then the actual content is called the matan, M-A-T-N. Right. So just just a brief overview. And welcome, James. James, we've got Dr. K and Paul.
God bless you, fellas. God bless you guys.
Hey, God bless you.
Thank you for having me. I know Dr. Kufar from TikTok.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so like I said, the whole memorization thing, as great as it is, right? It's got holes in it, right? Because our memory is not kind of like static, where we remember something and it sticks. And we typically, the standard method of memorization is you use something that's written, right? When I was in school and I had to learn my 1 to 12 times tables, nobody was sitting there next to me going 1 times 1 is 1, 1 times 2 is 2. No, you had it written, right? And you said it to yourself, right? whether you said it out loud or you said it, silently, and you always have to go back to the paper to verify that you didn't make a mistake. And this is the problem that I have with this so-called perfectly preserved Quran, that they can't produce the original copy, right? So here's a refutation to the whole, it was meticulously oral transmission. Zayd bin Thabit was born in 611. By the time that Muhammad supposedly, which guys, I don't believe he existed, migrated to Medina, he was only 11 years old. So when exactly did this kid start being Muhammad's best scribe? I don't know. At 15? At 16? Because when Muhammad passed away, he would have been only 21 years old. So how can he be the greatest
scribe as a teenager?
scribe?
That's interesting.
Right? And especially when Muhammad says in the hadiths that if you want to learn the Quran, learn it from Ubay Ka'b, Ibn Masud, Salim the freed slave, and I always forget the fourth guy. But he says 4 people. None of these 4 people had anything to do with the compilation of the Quran into the written form, either under Abu Bakr or under Uthman. And there was disagreements in the first place. So one of the refutations is the history of the Quranic text by Muhammad Mustafa al-Asami, page 95, 97. And here's a little summary. He discusses the gaps in the chain of custody, right, which is very important, chain of custody. We've also heard that during the, election. What's the chain of custody between the ballots? Also so there's no really, there's gaps in the chain of custody during the early Islamic period, particularly between Muhammad's unfortunate death, or I should say fortunate, and Uthman's codification, right? Manuscript evidence. We can look at the Sana, which is basically two Qurans, one in the lower, one in the upper.
Right.
And they don't agree with each other, and they don't agree with the 1924. As a matter of fact, there's not a single Quranic manuscript, whether whole or partial, that actually is identical to the Hafs. There's always some type of variation. And this is from the Quranic studies by John Wansberg. Second one would be like material evidence. So we could argue, using the Sana, that the Sana manuscript and other ancient Quranic fragments contain textual variants. Well, if something is perfectly preserved, how can you have variants? Right? When we look at these manuscripts, the Sana, the Topkapi, the Mali, even the Birmingham, which is not a 7th century manuscript.
4 pages. It was 2 pages, 4 sides, right? That's all it is, I believe.
Yeah, and it's it was looked at by Professor Qasim Samaria, and he's an expert in paleography, and he says it's most likely from the 8th and 9th century. It is definitely not from the C14, and the C14 it's just dating the material.
Yeah, just showing the audience. Here you've got the supposed Mohammadi Quran, of which we do not have a copy. Then you've got the Uthmanic Codex, of which we do not have a copy. Then here you've got various Qurans. So this is the Kufi version. This is the version not from Mecca, not from Medina, but from Kufa in Iraq. Right. So for some reason, they felt they need to canonize a version from Iraq. Now that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Well, it's a whole bunch of versions. And this is the 1924 Cairo version here. So, and this is not even all of the versions. These are just the major ones. So you can see that, yeah. Any comment from you guys, Paul and James?
I think the big thing that needs to be discussed when we're talking about the history of the Quran is, when was the Arabic language in written form actually developed?
Right.
And
I mean,
until we discuss that, we when we start discussing that, we learn like it's the early part of, I believe, the 7th century, 8th century.
Inscriptions date about the 4th, 5th century, 3rd, 4th, 5th century, but that's not the finalized version. Final Arabic is only around the 7th. Yeah, so it's quite late.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
And
So
it's not-
go ahead, brother.
no, I was just going to say, you have the Proto-Arabic, which dates back to the 8th century BC.
Right.
And then what became the classical Arabic is really taken from the Nabatean Aramaic script.
Yeah,
Yes.
true.
And that was from
But
the
when you-
4th to the 6th century.
But when you say Proto-Arabic, it's really South Arabian.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a different language.
Right, but we could
Okay.
say that that's like the first time that some form of Arabic existed, right? Not the classical, but even the classical was sometime between the 4th and the 6th.
Yeah.
Again, it's coming from the Nabatean, and there is another form which is from the south, which is the Sabaic
Yeah,
Arabic,
Yemeni.
which
That's
was
South
a
Arabian.
little- right? Which was a little bit more developed than the up north, but as
Yeah.
far as complete, well, the dots and the vowels probably didn't come until about the 8th century.
Yeah, no, we've got South Arabian script that goes back 1000 BC, 800 BC. They were a very well developed culture. James, you wanted to add?
We have inscriptions in the mountains of Syria of the Proto-Arabic, which is in the form of like almost the hieroglyphic and not really the Arabic that you see today. And I'm an Arabic reader and speaker. And as for the gentleman that is directly beneath you, I forgot your name. I'm so sorry, sir. Paul, I think Paul was alluding to the diacritical markings, right? I think. And we know that the diacritical markings occur like 90 years after Muhammad dies, right? So,
Yes.
and the diacritical markings are like so important to the Arabic language, right? Because you can, I'm not going to take up too much. It's your presentation, but Dr. Kufar.
Well, that's okay.
Dr. Kufar is kind of funny. But in chapter 12, verse 87 of the Quran, for instance, the term there says mercy of Allah. In the Arabic, it would say ruh of Allah. But the diacritical marking turned it into mercy, right? But there was no diacritical marking in the time of Muhammad. So how do you know that doesn't say spirit of Allah? Because the difference between spirit and mercy is the diacritical marking, which was not present, right? One word is ruh, the other is rawh, Allah, right? And so it's true what you fellows are saying. There is no basis for their position, and indeed there is no preservation, just merely with the progression of the Arabic language in an
Well,
anthropological
look, we know
sense.
for a fact Adam spoke Arabic, as Thunderous just advised us. We know it for a fact.
You know, I was having this conversation yesterday, Lloyd, with a few friends, and this is what we do, like in our university life. And we were talking about the Proto-Arabic and how it's one of the youngest of the Proto-Semitic languages, right? It pales in comparison to the Amharic. It pales in comparison to the Aramaic. It pales in comparison to the Hebrew, right? So and so when you hear a Muslim telling you, well, Adam spoke Arabic, that's not espoused by any scholarship, right? The most we could say is Adam spoke Adamic. That's the most we could say. We can give the language a name, but we just don't know what the language is. But, you know, Allah is asserting, and his followers are asserting, and when I say Allah, I really mean Muhammad. They're asserting that Adam spoke Arabic, which is kind of funny.
I'm going to help you guys with this. Let me just see. Adam spoke Arabic.
Arabic.
So, just for you guys, so you know.
Yeah, that's all I want to say, Dr. Kufar. Go ahead, brother.
Sure, no
Okay.
problem. Well, actually, there's a Sahih Bukhari hadith that says Ishmael.
Daif Bukhari, please.
Yeah, Daif Bukhari. Yeah, the Ishmael supposedly was learning Arabic in 1900 BC. So I'm like, it's just funny. Okay, so all right. So the second would be material evidence, right? So we have the Sana manuscript, which, as far as I know, it is still the oldest collection of manuscripts. I think it's like 40%, so it's not a complete codex or mushaf. The Sana manuscript and other ancient Quranic fragments contain textual variants compared to the modern Quran. This demonstrates that the text was altered over time. And this is what the German scholars and the Hidden Origins of Islam and Early Islam say, that the Quran was a historical development over a period of, say, 200 years. Right? Now, the Muslims will always come back and they'll say, oh, those variants are minor. It's primarily spelling or stylistic differences, and they do not affect the overall message of the Quran. Now, notice that there's been a shift. Now it's, oh, but the message is still the same, right? Now, when Christians say that with the changes that, we find in the textual variants, that the message is still the same, they won't accept it. But now that we've busted them, now it's like, yeah, but the message is the same, which is still false.
Mm-hmm.
So the refutation would be, again, back to the Quran and its historical context by, I really like Gabriel Say Reynolds in his book, right? Basically, the Sana manuscript reveals variations in the words and the phrases, some of which impact theological interpretations. That's very problematic when you start having differences in theology based on which manuscript or which Quran you're reading, right? And Professor Reynolds says that these cannot be dismissed as stylistic differences. We can also look at Fred Donner's work, The Narratives of Islamic Origins, which he highlights the fluidity of Quranic texts in the first two centuries of Hijra.
Mm-hmm.
And he emphasizes that the variants are more significant than, of course, the Muslims claim.
Yeah.
One that's also next one is the witness testimony, about the different Qiraat differences. So the argument that I would make if I was debating this is testimonies from classical Islamic scholars, they themselves reveal the existence of multiple Qiraats, right? Which is supposed to be a variant of the Quran. That's where you get the Hafs, the Warsh, the Duri, the Kelun, the Nafi, the Asim, the Kathir, the Yaqub, all these. There's, by the 15th century, there is 30 official canonized recitations, right? You got 10 teachers. Each one of those teachers, they pick 2 students, I guess, by popularity. So you end up with 30. So the Muslim might say, oh, yeah, but the Qiraats are divinely sanctioned variations preserved as part of the Quran's miraculous nature. Everything is miraculous. But where in the Quran does it say that Allah sent down Jibreel to repeat every single verse 7 times? And notice, I said that there's 30 Qiraats, not 7, not 10. There's 30 that have been, selected by Muslim scholars. Now, if anybody wants to chime in, please, you can chime in.
30 Qira'ats. Yeah, they acknowledge 14. I mean, that's the common acknowledgement. So just run that past me again.
Well, actually, there's 30. Let me pull up my PowerPoint. Actually,
Yeah. I mean, for instance, here they acknowledge in the Bridges translation, they acknowledge at least 10. We know there's 14.
Well, the Bridges actually does acknowledge 30.
Oh, really? Where's it?
Yeah, I have the Bridges, but I'm gonna steal and borrow Dr. J's. What do you call it? It's quicker for me to find him than it is for me to find my Bridges translation. So let me see. Okay, Muhammad.
And Qira'at. Yeah, but you get the transmissions. You have the Qira'ats, and then of the Qira'ats, each has at least 2 transmitters.
Right.
So it's 1 plus 2. So if it's 14, then it's plus 28. So that's 42. And then Hafs has 3 additional variants for 4 total. So that's 45 versions that we know of.
So, yeah, I'm not sure where you're getting the 45, but let me see what Jay has here.
14 Qira'ats plus 28 transmissions. That's 42. And Hafs has another 3 versions. There's 4 versions of Hafs in total. So that leaves us with 45.
Let's see what Jay says.
Any comment from you, Paul or James?
I'm just always amazed a bit. You call something preserved, and if you actually look at some of these differences, one of the people who does a great job with this is Hatun Tash, and she just pulls apart the differences in the Arabic words, and like oppositional. I mean, one is a singular, one is a plural. I mean, there's all these different you can't use this. They create huge doctrinal problems. And to argue there's such a thing as a standard Islamic narrative when with this tradition of having one Quran, like, this is insane. It's just, I mean, you can sit there and find different Muslims from different areas, and they'll come up and claim they have the same Quran, but they actually don't.
It's a dialect, brother. So anyway, based on my research and Jay's research and my cousin from my AI suckling mother, there was in around the 10th century, 7 of the readers, I call them imams, they were chosen by some guy named Ibn Mujahid. So he chose the Nafi, the Kathir, the Abu Amar, the Ibn Amir, Asim, which is the teacher of Hafs, Hamza, and some guy named Al-Qasiyah. Then, by the 12th century, some guy named Al-Shatabi, he selected 14, right? And that's where we get the Hafs. So we have 7 that were chosen, 7 actual teachers in the 10th century. Then about 2 centuries later, 14 students, they call them transmitters, were selected. And then in the 15th century, or the late 14th century, because this guy died in 1429, some guy named Al-Jazari, he selected 3 readers and 6 students. So that's where we get the Abu Jafar, the Yaqub al-Yamani, the Halaf, the Caliph or Caliph, whatever, Isa ibn Warden, Ruwais, and Ishaq, and Ibn Jumaz, Rao, and Idris. So the total of about, that adds up to 30. But there's more, because according to, what's his name, Dr. Shadi Nazar, I think he said there was definitely more than 40. And these are,
So, I don't know, Kufar. I'm gonna call you Kufar, and gentlemen.
Just don't call me late for dinner.
All right. Are we getting into secondary sources, or? And when I say secondary, I'm talking about the Sunnah, right? Because your average Muslim is gonna have to agree that the Quran is not intelligible without the Sunnah, right? And so that's the thing. The way you brought up the 12th century emendation right now, right? It's actually very relevant that you brought it up. I hope I'm not trying sidetracking you.
No. Hey, your input is appreciated.
So in the 13th century, they actually, 12th to 13th century, Islam went through a reformation. Okay, and it was a big reformation. Not a small one, a big reformation. Just as you alluded to, in the 12th century, you have the Quranic Reformation. But in the 13th century, Ibn Salih formalized ahadith sciences, right? And even then, if you have to affirm that ahadith give you a narrative, or at the very least aid in the reading and the intelligibility of the Quran, then you have to affirm that in the 13th century, the narrative of the Quran changed. Because what was once authentic has now been relegated into weakness, and vice versa. Right? So the actual narrative of the Quran meets a reformation in the 13th century. Because you can't tell me what was authentic and what was not authentic prior to this formal science of ahadith, which was actually coined and innovated. I'm going to use the right word. It's an innovation. Innovated in the 13th century. So they run into some huge problems. I don't see how you can claim perfect preservation if indeed in the 13th century, the whole of your theological narrative meets an alteration, right? But that's my take.
Yeah, so as far as the refutation for the whole, Kirat thing, if we read the book Introduction to the Quran by Richard Bell, he says that the qira'ats are not miraculous, but arose from the early Arabic script's lack of vowels and diacritical marks. The variations are human interpretations rather than divine intent. Because what happened was if you look at the early Arabic, it was really called a scripto de facto. The Arab language hadn't fully been developed yet. The dots and the diacritical marks, depending on the source, were anywhere between 50 and 100 years after the time of Muhammad. So you're talking 8th century, early 8th century, late 8th century, possibly even the 9th century. And these are man-made. So if the Quran is perfectly preserved, and we look at the earliest, manuscripts that we have, you'll notice they don't have vowels and they don't have dots. They also are missing the name of the chapters, which is very important. Who named the chapters? Who named chapter 1, Surah Al-Fatiha, chapter 2, Surah Baqarah, chapter 3, Surah Imran? Those don't exist in the early manuscripts. So that's also, I'm going to use your term, that's also an innovation by later Muslims.
Yeah, but Villainous is asking another question here. Wouldn't you need perfect preservation of the isnad chains? Well, Muslims only agreed in around the 14th century. They decided to agree that the isnad of the Quran was mutawatir. Prior to that, no scholars accepted it. In fact, the scholars will state you've got one chain of transmission, which means that is effectively it's a weak hadith. So it was only in the 14th century there was the consensus that yes, it's all mutawatir, it's all good. Before that, no scholar believed that. They said no, the Quran is that was the best they could say about it.
Yeah.
Right. The chain of the Quran is problematic to Islam.
Yeah.
Considering there are 22 verses in the Quran that calls the Quran a hadith. If the Quran is a hadith, then it should be privy to the formal process of authentication. And in the isnad, right? I'll say it in Arabic. Isnadahu dha'if. Its chain is weak. 3 out of the 6 transmitters of the Quran would be disqualified. Right? Uthman for what he did. Well, we won't get into that. But we know Hafs and Warsh, where one was senile, according to contemporaries, and the other was a thief.
You can run a country if you're senile. Don't knock it.
Okay.
we have that here in the United States. We have Mr. Dementia.
only for a little bit more time.
Yeah.
Just want to ask people to hit
my
the like
biggest
button.
problem is what you brought up, is that the Quran claims to be hadith, and if that is so, why is the Quran not rated as hadith or rated? I mean, it's a claim the Quran makes, and most Muslim scholars will admit to. So why is it not rated da'if?
I don't know. What's your name again, my brother?
Paul.
Paul. I don't know how you feel about, and I'm only bringing up Christianity for a moment, but I've witnessed a few Muslims that want to attack particular contributors to the Christian history, right? Through the early ages.
Yes.
And they want to say that, these contributors were no good because they made errors. So they should propose, the Muslims are proposing that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I'm inclined to grant their presupposition that okay, fine, let's throw out this contributor, right? Let's throw out this contributor since he made errors. I'm inclined to agree. I would love to grant them that premise, as long as they grant us that premise when assessing their religion. Okay? So the thing is that if we're going to throw the baby out in the bath, what'd you say?
It's a dean. It's a dean.
Dean, yes, dean. D-E-A-N, not D-E-E-N. Okay, anyway. So the point is, go ahead, brother.
No, it's a theocratic system. By the way, guys, I must apologize. I forgot. I just double booked myself. I was supposed to be on with Usama Dakdok, and so I made an error. So we should pull the plug here in about 35 to 40 minutes, and then I'll go on live with Usama discussing the Quran. I think we're finishing Noah and then moving to the next topic. So that was my error. I feel very bad. I don't know how it slipped my mind. I mean, this is great. I invited him on, but obviously, so after this, I need to go on with Usama. So yeah, please continue, guys.
I just wanted to say that if we grant them the premise that we throw the baby out with the bathwater, then what do we do about the Quran? I'm down to throw
it entirely out.
Yeah, throw it all out, right?
Well, just give us an early Quran. Give us an early written Quran that we can verify.
I mean,
All right.
The one they want to throw out is Paul, and if they throw out Paul,
Yeah.
Paul actually writes a creed. This is really early Christianity, and if we throw that, I think you don't have anything written within the first 100 years of Mo. So now we have a problem. I mean, if you can't come up with something written within the first 100 years. This is the big argument.
And they say the original Quran was written in Arabic. So where's the original Arabic Quran?
What do they consider original Arabic?
Adam spoke Arabic.
How do you read Arabic? How do you read the Arabic without the diacriticals? You guys don't understand the value of this argument because perhaps you don't read Arabic, but I do. And we've
listened to discussions on that. Yeah, but I mean, they can't prove any of this stuff. And the whole argument, the whole structure of the argument is to avoid chronology, history, and logic.
Well, yes. I'm going to yield after this because I know the brother Kufar, he worked very hard on this presentation. So I was just going to say, the Islamic claim seems to be exclusive. And when I say exclusive, I mean that it doesn't adhere to what we would call universal historicity, right? So how do I affirm the Islamic claim if Islam is the only one making the claim? Now, there are internal claims. Every historical entity is going to make an internal claim, but an internal claim is only boasted by archaeological, evidences, so to speak, and the extent, such as to say that if there is something in the form of documentation, it ought to be contemporaneous to the era, right, to the epoch. However, that sufficeth not in the historical method. In the historical method, it would require external corroborating evidence, right? So I can attest to the Huns, right, the Hunnies, Attila the Hun. I can attest to the Huns, not simply because we have archaeological evidence that attests to the Huns, but because the Romans wrote about the Huns. The Christians wrote about the Huns, right? The Jewish wrote about the Huns. This is called external corroborating evidence, right? This is something Islam does not have. This is what relegates in the world of history. It relegates Islam to a mythology, no different than Loch Ness or Bigfoot.
Agreed. Yeah. Let's try to limit the comments to say 30 seconds so that we don't interrupt the flow with Dr. K too much. Paul, anything you want to add?
No, I think that's pretty much. I'm pretty much in agreement with that.
Yeah, no, it's solid. I mean, that's really solid. Doc, thanks for that, James. Dr. K, back to you.
Yeah,
this is good stuff.
Yeah, I think we probably have more evidence for Bigfoot than we do for Islam. So, so another source would be Al-Sayuti. He's one of the Tijalas, right? And in his volume 1, page 227, he actually acknowledges that some of the qira'ats were rejected and deemed unauthentic. Now, this raises questions about this so-called divine origins that Muslims tried to tell you. Oh, that all the qira'ats were divinely, inspired or what have you. And that's just malarkey. Number 4 would be forgery and corruption claims. So the argument that I would use if I was debating is accusations of forgery and textual corruption by early Islamic history, particularly under the Umayyads and the Abbasid period, meaning from 661 forward, suggesting deliberate alterations of the text for political and doctrinal purposes. Now, the Muslim will come back and say, Islamic tradition strongly refutes any accusation of forgery, and the Quran explicitly states in 15:9 that Allah would protect it from corruption. Actually, no, the Quran does not explicitly state anything, because 15:9 says, is talking about the reminder or the dikra, and we will be its guardian. Well, what does a guardian mean? That doesn't say it's going to be protected from corruption. And Allah was incapable to tell me that he was going to be the guardian over the Quran. Moses was given a reminder. We are the people of the reminder, on top of being the people of the book. So what is this reminder? And this is why the Quran is so vague that I can make the kitchen sink fit in, right? So no, the Quran does not say that Allah is going to protect the Quran. He just says he's going to be the guardian over, over the reminder. And this is
if you say that the Quran is the New Testament and it confirms what came in the Torah, that hypothesis would work very well.
Yeah. And this is actually one of the books that I'm finishing up reading, The Hidden Origins of Islam, by Karl Heinz. This is the first volume. The second volume is called Early Islam. So in page, yes.
So I want to agree something quickly with what Mr. De Jongh said. So I just want to say, Mr. De Jongh, no one in their right mind would call adjacent contemporaneous evidence corrupt. The moment any entity does that, they've actually managed to denigrate the authenticity of their own corpus. I've never seen it. I would not ever argue that Jewish writings are corrupt. I would argue the theological narrative is incorrect, but I wouldn't argue corruption of extant evidence, because then I would be shooting myself in the foot, right? And so that's precisely what you just said. I just want to mention that that's a very astute acknowledgement, because by saying that the contemporaneous adjacent evidence is not corrupt, you actually allow for yourself to have what I said earlier, those external corroborating evidences.
And that's just exactly the problem. When historians have actually done their work, like the German historians, and they've gone back and they've looked at the what sources that they could find from the 7th and 8th century, like Doctrino Jacobi, John of Damascus, Cebius. We don't. What we see is not Islam. What we see is a mismatch, a mashing of different religious ideologies from that particular period, and also from the area, because Islam actually comes from the Arabia Petraea, which was full of Christians, heretical Christians, Jews, and also the Zoroastrians, which is why when you look at the early coins, you can see evidence of all three of them. You have coins, the early Umayyad coins from Muawi. They got crosses, right? Shouldn't have crosses on a Muslim coin. I don't care what they say. Rulers, when you became a ruler, the first thing you did was you minted coins. You didn't mint coins to please the people that you just took over. You minted coins to let them know, hey, I'm here. I'm your king. I'm your ruler, and so on and forth. Then we go to around the time of Abdul Malik, and this is something that I just recently learned. We have Muslim coins with the Shahada on one side and the Jewish menorah on the other side. Why are Muslims minting coins?
And the Shahada is an Aramaic idea that was taken across. And one more point, though, because the Shahada comes from Aramaic, but one more point. Muslims claim that Ishmael had like 20 books, Adam had 50 books, Jesus was sent a book, Moses had a book, and all of the prophets were given a book. So, I mean, God is obviously a librarian. So where are all these books that they claim all these people had that were... Abraham had books in Arabia, Enoch had books in Arabia, Ishmael had books in Arabia. Where are the books that they claim to believe in? How come they didn't preserve the Injil, the New Testament, the Torah, or even the Quran, and none of the other prophets' books? Not a single one.
Lloyd, is there any way I could send you something fairly quickly on the email? Yeah, because the gentleman brought up Khalifat Abdul Malik, the Caliph Abdul Malik. Are you aware, Kufar, that we have extant evidence between the Christians and the Muslims, communications between the Christians and Caliph Abdul Malik?
No, I do know that most of the scholars believe he was some kind of Unitarian because of his attack on Jesus' divinity.
Right.
But outside of that, and also the fact that they believe he is you could say the grandfather of Islam, right? It actually started, the religion started to take form under him. It wasn't still a religion, and then it finalized as a separate religion somewhere around the end of the 8th, 9th century, according to these German historians. So you could say he got the ball rolling, and then it was finalized under the Abbasids sometime in the late 700s, 800s. But I haven't really checked into him much.
I sent it to Lloyd. If you want, brother, I'll send them to you as well.
Yeah, Lloyd will send it to me because we communicate on Skype.
Awesome.
So Lloyd, if you can send that to me, that'd be great. So yeah, so I was talking about the hidden origins of Islam, and basically what these German scholars are saying. That particular book highlights the political motives during the Umayyad period that influenced the Quranic standardization. They don't believe that the Quran was standardized under some guy named Uthman. If we look at historical, we really don't have anything to back up a caliph named Abu Bakr, a caliph Umar, a caliph Uthman, even a caliph named Ali, right? Because everything that we have starts with the Umayyads. Okay, so he goes on. The claim that 15:9 does not preclude humans tampering as preservation is a theological assertion rather than a historical fact. I mean, Muslims can believe what they want to believe, but can they prove it? And that's what I always try to tell them. We also have Al-Tabari and his tafsirs. I do have the history of Al-Tabari, but I don't have his tafsirs because I don't read Arabic. He reveals debates over verses that were omitted. Well, how can you have something that's preserved and your scholars are talking about, verses that were, left out, right? And he also says that they were doctrinal disputes in early Islam. Now, I hate when they say early Islam. Well, Al-Tabari was 9th century, 10th century. So Islam would have been, formulated back there. Argument 5, and I do have a whole 40 pages on this also that I just put together. Oral tradition, right? Muslims will tell you, what does the Quran mean? Okay, it means recitation, right? So they say for the first 100, 200 years, everything was oral tradition, but they forget. I thought that as Muhammad was receiving his revelation, they were writing these things down, and animal skins and rocks and leaves and
Jawbones.
bones. So let me ask you a question. Do we have any rocks with Quranic verses? How did not Abu Bakr. How did Uthman burn rocks? How do you do that?
Allahu A'lam, brother.
Yeah.
Allahu
I mean, even with bones, right? Unless they had a crematory, we should have been able to find, the scalpel of camels or goats or whatever they use. We should be able to find rocks. We have inscriptions throughout the area, right? We have inscriptions from the 3rd, 4th, and 5th century that show clearly, paganism was being practiced. And then all of a sudden, by the 6th century, guess what? And this is according to Professor Ahmed El-Jalad. He says the inscriptions of pagan worshiping kind of stops. Now we see some form of monotheism. So how could Muhammad be this leader of this great pagan tribe when he's saying there were basically no pagans by the 7th century? Right. So Muslims their argument is the Quran was initially orally transmitted, introducing the potential for human error, memory lapses, and intentional or unintentional alterations before it was compiled into a written form. Muslims will tell you the oral tradition was robust and reliable method in the Arab culture. And Muhammad's companions were meticulous in memorizing and teaching the Quran. But wait a minute. Muhammad himself forgot verses. Name one person during the time of Muhammad that had the whole Quran memorized. Abu Bakr, what did he do? People were supposedly dying. I keep forgetting. I'm not on TikTok.
And, and why would he need to burn Qurans if the Quran was perfectly preserved?
Yeah, but here's the thing.
And
If the
that is it. That's
yeah.
probably the most soundest argument there. If the Quran's perfectly reserved, what made him destroy the evidence for perfect preservation?
So if they had the Paul brother, they had something called Hurub al-Ridda, the apostasy wars. So
Yes.
when Momo died, Abu Bakr said something crazy. He said, those of you who worship Muhammad, first of all, we found evidence that now they're worshiping a mere man. Those of you who worship Muhammad is dead, but Allah lives on. All right. Bukhari 1241 and 1242. Okay. So then it says that they were conflicting on the reading of the Quran. So the apostasy wars was not only people apostating from Islam at alarming rates, but they were then in wars because, the region near Basra was reading the Quran in a different manner than the rest, for instance. And this was causing wars. And they were literally killing each other over this. So even at the onslaught of like the post-mortem of Islam or of Momo, at that very moment, we can prove there is differences per region. It's kind of embarrassing, if you ask me.
Well, I'm going to say that everything that you just said is just based on the standard Islamic narrative, because there's no evidence for Abu Bakr or Omar or Uthman. We have absolutely no evidence for Iran in that particular time period.
I agree.
So we have to go by the standard Islamic narrative, which, again, I've gotten to the point now, I'm not even going to talk about Muhammad because I'm just lending credibility to this guy who I can't find in history, right? So the whole memorization, and like I said, in my towards the end of this book, I actually have like 19 studies. So according to the book called The Oral Transmission in Islam by William Graham, in pages 92 and 94, he points out that oral traditions were significant. While significant, they were not immune to errors of reinterpretations, especially in the era of tribal conflicts and competing religious claims. I believe what happened is when the Romans and the Persians were fighting for 26 years, they basically decimated each other. They kind of left a power vacuum. And these Arabs, who later on became Muslims, they were all, all these different rulers were all fighting each other, which is probably all these wars. And really, it wasn't the war or the Ridda War because there were no Muslims at that time. But all these different wars, these people were vying to see who's going to take over as, and fill that void in that area, right? That's why you see Muawiyah, then you have, Yazid and Marwan. Now, the thing that I found interesting about Marwan the First, is that his mother's name was Amina. Same mother's name as Muhammad. He had two wives that were named. One was named Aisha, and the other one was named Zainab. Same two wives that Muhammad supposedly had. And if you look at his lineage, there's an Umar and an Uthman and a Muhammad. Now, I'm not saying that there couldn't have been a guy named Muhammad. It's very possible there was a Muhammad, an Umar, or a Uthman. They just weren't from Mecca and Medina, and they weren't any kind of rulers. And they were not born in that time period, because Uthman, Umar, and the Muhammad that are listed in his lineage, they're all from the late 7th and early 8th century, way past Muhammad when he was supposedly dead, right? We also have Sahih Bukhari, where, talks about the companions themselves forgot verses. Hell, Muhammad himself said, I was reminded by so-and-so of such verse, right? If the guy is forgetting stuff, I mean, not to mention that supposedly he had black magic and he imagined doing things, right? We don't see any kind of preservation, right? So I kept asking Chad, give me some more arguments. And here's one that's really big, and that's part of my other book that me and Lloyd did. We still have to finish. There's We have absence of contemporary written evidence. We should have evidence from the 7th century, not from Muslims writing about Islam in the 7th century when they lived in the 9th, 10th, 11th onward, right? So what these guys are doing is they're redacting it backwards, right?
Right.
They're trying to give some credence to, oh, this is when it started, but really that's not when it started. So the argument is we have lack of contemporary written evidence for the 7th century that matches the standard Islamic narrative, right? So, and this suggests there's possible modifications in later centuries, which we know it's true. Again, Muslims will come back with the oral, that the Quran is primarily preserved orally. Again, that's not true, because didn't Muhammad have the scribes write down his revelations as he received it? So it seems that both of them were happening at the same time, right? And also, I doubt that Jibril came down and gave Muhammad a verse and the dude memorized it like that. Or did Jibril come and spend 2, 3, 4 days reciting the same verse to Muhammad so that he could remember? Or maybe did he give him something written? Because we all know the standard method of memorization is using written text.
So you're funny that you brought that up, Kufar, brother. That's a great point. Chapter 6, verse 93 for Tafsir Baidawi talks about Kabbalah. You ever heard of him? The one who, I think you know this, Kufar, because you're actually pretty astute in this matter. The one who was a scribe for Momo. And when he was reciting chapter 23 to Momo said, wow. And then the guy commented, he said, oh, Allah is the greatest of creators. And Momo said to the scribe, he said, why don't you write it down, what you just said, like Allah revealed it?
Yeah. Well,
you remember that?
So we have, and now we have a whole other can of worms. Is Allah just one of many gods? Thank you, Quran. Thank you, Hadith, Quran.
There's also the hadith about the Christian guy who converted to Islam, and he was a scribe of Muhammad.
Right.
And the reason that he went back to Christianity, he says, man, I write down whatever I want, right? And that's why he said, no, I can't, I can't stay in this religion. This guy, if I tell him something and he says, yeah, write it down that way, right? And there's also the one where supposedly they're in a house or a tent or whatever. So it's Muhammad, the scribe, and there's an old blind man there, and the verse comes down about jihad, and the blind man turns around and says, yo, what about me? I'm blind. So right away he gets a correction to his revelation. Allah was snappy, right? And then he changes it so that it kind of excludes the blind, the lame, the sick, etc., who can't go and do jihad. It's just I don't know how anybody can believe this stuff.
I agree.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so some refutations would be again, Gabriel. I think he's got a updated edition. Would be the Quran and its biblical subtext, right? And Professor Reynolds explains the absence of complete Quranic manuscripts from Muhammad's time, right? Which makes it very difficult to verify. And this is what I keep telling Muslims: without the original, how can we verify anything? I can't verify somebody's memory, right? I gotta have it written, because I can claim, hey guys, I memorized the Hobbit from cover to cover, but you guys don't have the Hobbit. How can you verify, right? And it doesn't matter if 100 people supposedly claim that they memorized the Hobbit, or 200 million, as the Muslims say. Oh, we have 200. Yeah, but you have 200 million people who memorized the what? The Hafs. Because you ain't got 200 million people from the past. These are all people from today, right? So that claim goes out the door, because they're just memorizing the Hafs. But the question is, how can you prove to me that the Hafs is the original Quran, which we know it's not, because the Hafs has the diacritical marks, which didn't exist in the earliest manuscripts.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
again,
what's the point of memorizing a language you can't translate anyway?
yeah, and again, relying on oral traditions without actually having it written down where you can go back to it. I mean, it's just your word against mine. And what do we call that? Chinese the Chinese
Yeah.
whispers.
Yeah. Can I mention something?
Sure.
This
We're
is
at
from
that.
the early church fathers on heretics. You're looking at Irenaeus and Athanasius, right? So Irenaeus here criticizes heretics for misinterpreting scripture and rejecting tradition. But he also states that heretics do not consent to scripture or tradition, for they allege that the truth was not delivered by means of written documents, but viva voce. In other words, by voice, by that's what heretics do. So they don't acknowledge the written document, but they say, no, we got this from by mouth, which is what Islam does, which is very interesting. I just thought an interesting point to make
Yeah.
there.
I mean, I'm not saying to totally dismiss, oral tradition or oral transmission, but as a way of perfectly preserving something, it's impossible because over the months, the decades, especially when you're talking about all this stuff was written by people that were 200-300 years into the future. You have no way of verifying. How do I
Right.
know that verse is exactly the way that it supposedly came down? We don't, right? And then we go to 7, which is the so-called claimed standardization by Uthman, right? So we have Caleb Uthman. He orders to burn non-standardized Quranic texts. How do I know that they were non-standardized? Where's the evidence? Because I don't know, but to me, when you burn evidence, you're trying to hide something. Now, although I don't believe that this happened,
Yep.
I believe the standardization came much later. It probably started under Abdul Malik and what's his guy's name, Al Jazeera or something like that. Uh,
Al-Hajjaj.
yeah,
Al-Hajjaj,
yeah, Al
which
Hajjaj.
also seems to be a Yemeni surname, which comes out of the Yemeni Jews, because Yemen at that point was, I think, a schismatic Jewish kingdom. Well, it was a Jewish kingdom. In fact, Judaism. So Yemen was the most developed country of southern Arabia, and at that time in history, there were apparently 4 million people or so in Arabia, and half of those were in Yemen, and they were a Jewish nation. So I wouldn't say Orthodox Jewish. I mean, they seem to be some kind of heresy, but they were Jewish, which means that they were Judaism at that time was the predominant religion in the region.
Yeah.
You know, I have another 10 minutes and then 9 minutes, and then I need to get off and get on with Usama because I double booked and I totally
All
slipped my mind.
right. Okay, so no problem. Yeah. So the argument would be that Caleb Uthman, he burnt the so-called standardized Quranic texts, right? Which implies that multiple versions existed, and we know they did because Ubay and Ibn Masud, their codices, one had 111 chapters, the other guy had 116. We know that according to Islamic sources, now we don't have any of their codex, which is kind of weird. Even Ali's Quran or Mus'haf was actually in the correct revelation order, meaning he had chapter 96 as the first chapter, and he had chapter 5 as the last chapter, right? But we can't really verify it because we don't have anything from those people because I don't believe they existed, right? So the Muslims will come back and they'll say Uthman's action was to unify the Muslim community under a single reading of the Quran. But if that's true, if the Quran had been perfectly preserved, why are we having all these differences? Why is it that Ibn Masud and Ubay Kab, 2 of the 4 people that Muhammad said, if you want to study the Quran, go and study from these 4 guys? Did they not memorize the right Quran? How can one guy say, no, there was only 111 chapters. These other 3 were mostly prayers. And then you got the other guy. He's got 116. So he adds 2 chapters to it. I mean, these are the best of the best. It doesn't seem like
Yeah.
perfect.
And there's other
Perfect.
inconsistencies, like the first chapter of the Quran, the Fatiha, is not present in all these versions. And
Yeah.
again, the number of verses is not present. And then also, if you go into, where did Paul go? if you go into earlier Qurans, there's no chapter, there's no verse numbers.
Right. And if you look at, interestingly enough, Lloyd, if you look at the top Kaki manuscript, so consensus would show that Surah Al-Fatiha nazalat fi Mecca, meaning it came down in Mecca, right? It was revealed in Mecca. But if you look at the top Kaki, it says it's revealed in Medina. Do you know that? There's a lot of discrepancies in the top Kaki, for instance.
Yeah, I think last I read there was over 2,200 variants between the top copy, which I believe is claimed to be the earliest complete mushaf.
Right. That is
I
their
think
claim.
it's like 99.98% or something like that. And it does not agree with what, the standardized huffs that we have today. As a matter of fact, I have not been able to find any evidence that there's anything today, any of the manuscripts that we know of, that actually 100% agree with the huffs. What we do see is an evolution or a correction, right? Dan Brubaker, can't wait till this complete book comes out. And his little book that he released, with I think 22 examples, you can see the insertions, the deletions, the taping, right? There was, I think, 9 verses. Somebody added Allah to it because it wasn't in the original. And these are not just, diacritical issues. Some of these are actually consonantal, right? They have different letters. So there is so much evidence out there that I don't understand why, in 2024, almost 2025, people like me are still dealing with this stuff on TikTok and other platforms. So we'll probably end up on number 7. So the refutation to the Muslim claim that, what Uthman was doing was, unifying the Muslim community under a single reading. But this also undermines the claim that Muhammad received the Quran in 7 different ways. So if Muhammad was okay with 7, how come Uthman has a problem and now wants to put it under 1 reading, right? If the Muslims tell you, it came down in 7, 7 modes or 7 ahrufs, okay, but Uthman is putting them under just 1. So that means he's throwing out the other 6. And who the hell is Uthman? Right. So if we read the Quranic Studies, Sources and Methods of Scriptural Interpretation by John Warensburg, he says that Uthman's burning of non-standardized text indicates a lack of textual uniformity and suggests, again, political motives for controlling the narrative. And we know that this is true by the different rulers. Now, we also know that he gave Hafsa back her Quran, which is actually the Quran from Abu Bakr. Where is this Quran? Along comes a guy named Marwan the First, and when he's the governor of Medina, what does he do? He destroys the Quran from Hafsa. That's kind of weird. Uthman didn't destroy it because obviously he didn't find anything wrong with it. But along comes Marwan the First before he becomes a ruler of the Umayyads. I think he was the 3rd. He decides, hey, I'm going to burn the Quran from Hafsa. Well, that's a problem, right? And we also have stuff in Sahih Bukhari, and other Islamic traditions talking about the variant, the destruction of these so-called, variant codices. That to me shows if something was preserved from the beginning, why are we having so many problems? Why are we having scholars talking about lost surahs, lost verses? And it gets even worse.
15,000 lost surahs.
And it gets even worse when we bring in the Shiites.
I'm sorry, brother.
Well, I mean, when you bring in the Shiite stuff, like the works of Al-Kafi, he says Muhammad was given 17,000 verses. Hello, that's about 11,000 verses missing. That's a lot of goats. That's a lot of goats. So,
a lot of hungry goats, man.
Yeah. All right, Lloyd. I think we can probably end it.
Yeah, unfortunately. So look, I'm available again on the probably the 26th, not sooner than the 26th again, because
Okay.
Friday I'll be talking with Paul, and then the 26th would work for me.
Okay.
Unless you want to do early on Friday, we can try and let's chat maybe earlier on
Yeah.
Friday. But let's
Well,
see. But
I mean,
otherwise, I've got the whole book
yeah,
ready.
I'm pretty much home
26th.
because I'm not doing anything pretty much until January. So I'm just home doing research and
Yeah.
making my crazy songs and also putting together these, these 30, 40, 50 page
Cool stuff.
ebooks.
Yeah, we'll continue with this. So let's do this
Yeah.
again on the 26th would be the best. I'll have to let
Okay.
you know because I'll be away. I'll be leaving.
Okay.
So I'll be coming back. I'll be staying with family. I'll
Yeah,
surround
I
Paul.
mean, if we can do it earlier, fine. But the holidays, stuff like that, no problem.
Yeah,
Just
but
let me
yeah,
know.
it's gonna be a little tight for me. So
Yeah, just
but let's keep in touch and we'll try and work
right.
this out. So yeah, we got to call it a night here, guys. Thanks, and I've got to be on with
And-
Sam. I've got to prep that now.
And remember, we only got through, I think, the second chapter of the first book. That's like 72 pages.
Yeah,
All right,
no, yeah. The thing is, I have so many guest streams lately, and some of my own stuff, so it's hard to schedule time. You know, it's not like
Don't forget to hook me up with Odin and Mel, or
yeah.
JC,
Well, but
right?
that's why we're gonna have to wait for next year at
Yeah.
this point to try to do that. I'll try and do more panels next year.
Okay.
My aim is to do more panels, to bring people on, to get more people on chat like this. So cool. So guys, I will see you in about 10 minutes with Usama, Dakdok.
All right.
We'll be talking about the Quran, Noah, and James. Thanks for joining us. Dr. K, that is brilliant information.
Sure.
Really
No problem.
excellent. And also, can you make a text comment? I'll pin it where people can get hold of your documents, where they can buy them, because this is
Yeah,
brilliant.
I'll go back to your
Yeah,
the live
Dr.
stream and I'll post it on there. I'm also actually downloading and putting a copy on my side and linking it back to your side so we can cross promote each other.
Radio, sounds good.
So
James?
if you could just send Dr. K the CD.
Yeah, he did. I got your
He did.
stuff. Thank you very much for that. I'm gonna go take a look at it and add it to my. I've got over 6,000 books on Islam. I know it's crazy, and I
So
got also.
I have the contemporaneous stuff if you guys ever needed the Arabic because I translated. They're not even
Okay.
translated. So let me know. Christian Arabic writings that
Okay,
are
yeah.
contemporaneous to Islam. So
I mean,
Okay. So yeah, guys, I got to wrap it up here.
All right,
I
man.
got to go. I
God
gotta
bless,
prep.
guys.
I
So,
will
look,
see you
we'll be
on
in
the
touch.
next slide. All right, man.
Thanks
God bless
to the
you,
audience. And thanks,
enjoy
Paul.
your
Dr.
Christmas.
Paul Sutliff. Thanks, Dr. K. Brilliant stuff.
All right.
See you guys. God bless.